We're now going to move to the Sub-Saharan Africa's leading integrated energy group and now invite their group chief executive, Wale Tinubu, group chief executive for Wanando PLC, for his presentation.
So the minister, well, I think he's left, distinguished minister, ladies and gentlemen, fellow colleagues, I'm supposed to speak today about infrastructure as a catalyst for growth in the emerging markets. Now, last year I spoke in general about strategies for winning in the oil industry, because as my colleague and deputy CEO said today when he arrived, Guyana or Bridgetown looks exactly like one of our major oil towns called Warri in Nigeria 30 years ago, where it's bristling with excitement, bristling with a lot of drive, a lot of enthusiasm, and the production has been launched. The barrels have started to flow. There's a lot of excitement as to what we all can do together, and the whole idea is to be a wise country and a wise industry, which means you learn from other people's mistakes as opposed to learning from your mistakes. And so we do have quite a few experiences where we've succeeded, and certainly where Nigeria has failed in its evolution. But one key aspect is that Nigeria has a very large private sector indigenous participation in the industry. We currently produce, as an industry, about 400,000 barrels a day and about 1 billion standard cubic feet of gas. And we expect in the next 3 years to be achieving close to 1 million barrels a day over the next couple, as a result of the ongoing divestment of some of the majors from the offshore fields as they focus on the international fields. One of the key things which we did, which was interesting to hear, listen to the last speaker, in general about the NGL developments, about the power plants, because in reality, it's really the infrastructural developments which the population generally gets to enjoy. All gets produced, gets shipped, taxes and royalties come to government, and government invests in the public sector. But the actual private sector involvement will occur as a result of the exploitation of the critical infrastructure which gets built out. So power plants, gas to liquid plants, fertilizer plants, NGL plants. That's where I would like to say members in this room are going to have a lot of fun doing, and you really need to get plugged in now. Now, one thing we have in our advantage is that global energy demand is rising, growing by 4% a year till 2027. The emerging market economies are the biggest players in this. So Africa, Asia are huge areas where demand is very strong, and that basically means that there's plenty of demand that's going to come. Mm-hmm. There's sustained oil and gas demand. Oil and gas demand today is about 103 million barrels a day, so effectively it's growing 1 to 3% per annum. So the point was made earlier on that even though everybody's talking about hydrocarbons being reduced and renewables being the next factor, the issue is that hydrocarbons are so well established that it's going to be tough to reduce the demand in the near term. And in reality, the point was made earlier on that a reduction in demand, and that demand really should come from the developing countries, who are really the major polluters in the world, as opposed to the developing economies that need to export and produce these resources to succeed. So it's a plus, but even if we end up in a situation wherein some trade-offs need to be done, the carbon credits will lie with countries like Guyana, because at the end of the day, you're not an emitter. Okay, you are effectively on the receiving side. There's surge in energy infrastructure investments. Global energy investments surpassed $3 trillion in 2024. And technological advancement is actually going to see an increase in electricity consumption, probably as much as 25% as a result of artificial intelligence. There's so much power that is still going to be required. And I'm happy phase 2 is already being planned here, because one of the things that all countries that have had the benefit of resources have faced is excessive power demand, which ends up in a situation where you can never really catch up, because economic growth at 45% means that there's huge power demand. And it becomes a moving target, which if you don't deal with today, it will be very, very difficult to catch up on. And countries have seen their worlds being reversed, where they start to face power cuts and power load shedding as a result of the unfortunate curse of rapid development. And Guyana is definitely going to go through that. As you can see, 10,000 cars being registered, the road network being choked, and all of that. Okay. Now, despite the growth of opportunities in infrastructure, the deficit still remains, and emerging markets is the key. 700 million people lack electricity products or energy products, concentrated primarily in Africa and Asia, and a lot of Caribbean islands have huge energy deficits, and so there's going to be opportunities there. There's also a capital gap. Financing is not really available, and I'm really happy that we're opening up the Guyanese market to include public-private sector in terms of phase 2. That's the sensible thing to do, definitely, because you need to start to move ahead to catch on to this. Then transition, we're still going to, I mentioned the point, we're still going to continue to rely on fossil fuels and grid limitations, because indeed you would need to pull continental demand to be able to expand rapidly. Now, one of the drivers for the energy infrastructure deficits in emerging economies has really been the issue of policy and regulatory challenges. Changing your regulations is a disincentive. Everybody needs to know where they're going. If the private sector is going to be invest in this new project, the new power plant, it's critical that there is a long-term investment policy framework, not just agreed upon, but also enshrined by an act of parliament, so that everybody knows what they're getting at. Okay? Access to financing tends to be expensive, and all the work has been done to ensure that, for example, the likes of US Exim and now the African Export-Import Bank are active in the markets, because oftentimes you find cost of capital between here and there could be a difference of 3 to 4 percentage points for the same project, same economics, same typical demand pool. I wouldn't bother talking about limited private sector participation, because the reverse is going on here. And then occasionally there's a high project risk perception when it's an emerging market country that is launching a project. But in this instance, Guyana has done a very, very good job in ensuring it has focused on creating a level playing field for private sector investment. It has codified its investment laws in advance, and it has a pretty transparent system of analyzing and ensuring that its future licensing rounds, as well as public sector private participation projects, do have a system that gives people confidence. So the reality is that you would need to ensure that to deal with this energy infrastructure deficit which exists, as well as utilize the benefits of the gas, the NGLs, and the production to leverage public-private sector partnerships. Basically, it provides better infrastructure solutions. It's faster project completions, and I'm happy the gentleman who spoke ahead said they're looking to get the second power plant up in 2 years. It is possible. Higher returns on investments. The prices are keen on the electricity to be able to do it at 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour. The real driver is the cheap gas. The capital cost tends to be the capital cost, although the private sector will certainly roll out faster and more efficiently than a typical government project will do. Risks are fully appraised earlier, and effectively, it creates greater efficiency, reduces government budgets and government budget deficits. Next point would be it helps foster regional cooperation. And the point has been made regarding the advantage of having northern Brazil and Suriname. I think the point was made by the minister from Suriname. The reality is that when you pool demand within a continent and treat it as a continental drive, then the project costs drop because people can look at the market from a larger scale. So one of the key things we did in Nigeria was build a West African gas pipeline. And so our 2 to 3 billion cubic feet per day of gas that is generated and produced, first things first, we do 27 million tons, which gets shipped out via the LNG. But then there's a very large local gas demand, primarily for power, and then thereafter for process, for fertilizer and urea, which is exported out of Nigeria. Majority of the exports actually come to South America. Brazil is one of the largest buyers of Nigerian fertilizer. So Guyana is well positioned to be able to capture that market, being able to aggregate regional demand and provide the infrastructure, for example, the port, which would need to be built in order to take advantage of the trade in them. The next thing will be unlocking innovative financing. I think certainly you will find it will mitigate currency and sovereign risks. It will create project bankability, as well as long-term strategic investment opportunities, not just for profitability. Now, I think the private sector is critical. So I think ExxonMobil have done their bit. The government has signed a good concession agreement. The production is live. I think the next step really would be to create a very solid public-private sector partnership framework, which would see Guyana define its long-term objectives, developmental objectives, and define the sort of framework that it needs to attract investments. Because the real growth is going to come from the private sector coming in. There's a limit to how much the government will be able to do with its own share of royalties and profit and tax profits. And I think the private sector will bring a lot of advantages to hand: technical expertise and innovation, better project management and execution, local capacity development. And I was very happy ExxonMobil had done their local development award ceremony, which the speaker mentioned about how excited they were at the number of local companies. Now, Nigeria has we've had the benefit of extensive local participation in our oil industry. And we have major projects owned by us. So for example, a 650,000 barrel a day refinery built at the cost of $20 billion has been built in Nigeria by Africa's richest guy, a guy who's worth about $25 billion. We have extensive urea plants that have been built, fertilizer plants that have been built, and all by the indigenous private sector, using joint ventures with international companies, raising funding in the local environment, from the local bond market, from the local savings market, as well as the international market. And that's been done successfully. So having that framework means that economic growth should exist, but it really needs to be inclusive. The local population needs to benefit, and the best way of doing it is to having a framework that codifies these aspirations and helps them key into the opportunities. Other opportunities are clearly market creation and commercial viability. It helps global partnerships for knowledge sharing, and certainly to a certain extent creates accountability and engages the communities to buy in. Because at the end of the day, if you have a satisfied host community, because they're actively participating in activity, then you're likely to get any hostilities in the long term. I've discussed in detail about the government, but just to underscore that, clearly the government will need to clearly define an attractive regulatory, monetary, and fiscal policies. They need to focus energies on designing the framework and also the potential projects which people could do. And the last speaker gave a very good presentation as to the potential for the phase 2 of the power plant in terms of setting out what it should look like But also what would be interesting would be to see the framework supporting the power purchase agreements, which is what guarantees long-term fairness in terms of dealings, because at the end of the day, the agreement will need to be renewed and reviewed as time goes on and as materiality occurs in terms of changes in certain fundamental investment investment parameters which occur at the beginning of the transaction. Definitely, number 4 will be stronger technical partnership and commitment to knowledge transfers, and then mobilizing the right equity for the right projects, as well as innovative financing structures. Now, in terms of us as a company, we've been involved in a whole range of substantial infrastructure projects. So we have the Okpai Power Plant, which is a 900 megawatt power plant. So Oando is a joint venture partner in this project. We have 40% in this project as the operator of the Oando Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation joint venture. We are the operator of that. And we have 2 power plants, 2 times 450 megawatts, which we operate in Nigeria. And that accounts for about 18% of the electricity in the country. The OBOB gas plant is a 1.5 billion capacity gas processing plant. So effectively, the ExxonMobil gentleman mentioned that the new FPSOs will have a total processing capacity of 1.2 billion cubic feet. So that plant processes what all the ships currently combined do. We built a midstream jetty to save $200 million a year in demurrage costs because we had ships coming into the port, and as the country developed, these ports were designed in shallow drafted locations, and we incurred a lot of money lightering large vessels before they came into port. And we were able to come with a solution to build a midstream jetty, which is 2 kilometers length in the deepest part of the channel. It cost us $150 million to build, and we saved the country $200 million annually, indefinitely, as a result of this construction. We built a local distribution gas pipeline in Nigeria, in Lagos in particular. We built 3 now, but the first one we built was quite interesting. We didn't have a framework, so we sat with the government and said, we want to distribute gas, we want to build a local distribution pipeline. We want to take all the industries in Lagos, which is 60% of the industrial capacity, off using dirty fuel, low-power fuel for their power requirements. And the government liked the idea, and we were able to do a joint venture wherein we designed a framework, designed the laws were passed around the framework, and we were able to commence the construction of a pipeline system where we built the first 7 kilometers. We tied up about 10, 15 industries, then built another 40 kilometers, tied up another 50, 60 industries, and effectively we were able to build 150 kilometers, taking gas from where ExxonMobil, for example, the equivalent where they made landfall with their pipeline, we teed off from that as a local company and built a gas pipeline that went equivalent all the way around Bridgetown, which is what we did in Lagos. And we were able to have 150 industries switch onto that gas pipeline. And that pipeline indirectly generated over 1,000 megawatts of power for industries who then used that gas for process. And so a lot of companies saw their costs drop dramatically, and a lot of indigenous companies were able to build factories using the cheap gas and the cheap power cost to use it as a competitive advantage to do other things. We did projects, for example, like reduce the cost of water in the cities by building power plants using our gas to reduce the recirculation cost, because water was being recirculated around the city using heavy diesel or heavy fuel or for old power plants. The point being that you can impact the society with the indigenous companies by building sub-projects which help you take the benefit of the resource which is being done, because the majors will do the big things, but then the medium-sized projects are really reliant on the smaller-sized companies who can actively do that. I mean, an interesting concept in Nigeria was that we exported over 1.5 billion cubic feet of gas daily via the liquefied natural gas projects, and our local consumption was under 500 million standard cubic feet of gas. And we were still burning fuel and burning diesel for many, many years. Until today, we still burn fuel. So one of the lessons that you can take away from that is that it's extremely important that now that the gas exists, that the framework is put in place to ensure that local consumption is prioritized, okay? Because what happens is that eventually over time, everything gets exported. The dollars come in, the dollars go into government coffers, but at the end of the day, the rate at which the public sector will inject capital into an economy is much slower than the way the private sector would do so. I mean, there are other success stories which we've seen. I mentioned Dangote Refinery, which is going on. Well, I put the Guyana gas to energy project as one of the ones that are likely to be extremely successful early on before I listened to the presentation today, but that's certainly one that's very well structured. I read about it before I came here and likely to do very well. And there are other interesting projects that are there. We are, as a company, are always looking for opportunities and are quite excited to be here and really look forward to participating in the economy in areas like gas distribution, where we have had plenty of experience. We're the major supplier of gas and natural gas liquids to one of the continent's largest urea and fertilizer manufacturers in Nigeria. They have a dedicated pipeline. In fact, we have 2 dedicated pipelines to them from our oil fields, and they are currently exporting 60 to 70% of their production comes to Brazil, actually, in Nigeria. And we do quite a number of other projects other than simply producing oil. We're involved in power, as I mentioned earlier on, in gas processing, in natural gas liquids, and a whole range of other things. So effectively, the call to action for you to achieve that will be to enable public-private sector partnerships, as I mentioned, collaborative projects, reduce the burden on public resources while ensuring efficient service delivery, creating an enabling environment to develop clear and stable policies, reduce bureaucracy, streamline bureaucratic processes, let it be easy for people to make investments in the country, and strengthen regional and international cooperation. We need to pull the markets together and use Guyana as a bridgehead into supplying and attacking the rest of the South American opportunities. So thank you very much for the opportunity.